Hey guys, so we're going to try to do take number 2 here. This will probably be a longer vlog series, so maybe I'll break it up into 2 parts. But I wanted to talk about what I did to get better, and I'm actually on my way to go do some dirt bike riding right now. It'll be the first time in 2 weeks. Got bronchitis about a week ago. I seem to be rebounding from it pretty good, so just gonna go out there and see how I feel. Hopefully everything goes good. It's a beautiful day. It's like 72 degrees already, about 11 o'clock in the morning. But along the lines of me having a cold, I actually just did another vlog the other day about how I started an herbal protocol and how I've gotten sick since I've started it. So that could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, it could be nothing at all. But if you're interested in hearing about that, I did another vlog on it. But so I guess the best way to start this is just from the beginning. I've done some other vlogs on my symptoms and how I got diagnosed and that whole history and that whole timeline. So I won't dive into that too much in this one. But just to recap really quick, I got sick December 2013. And it took me until the middle of 2014 to realize that I had Lyme disease and several co-infections. And in particular, the co-infections I was dealing with was both types of Ehrlichia, Bartonella, and both types of Rickettsia. And it's probably worth noting that I still hadn't had a positive Lyme disease test through IGeneX or any other lab, whether it was LabCorp or Quest. I was never showing up positive, but my doctor made that diagnosis based off of me having all those other co-infections, and also because my C4A levels are really, really high and my CD57 level was really low. So this first doctor that I started to see was based up in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and his protocol was basically just orals. I'm not sure that he ever really reverted to IV treatment. He was a Lyme literate physician. His theory was that you have to treat co-infections before you treat Lyme disease. I think the reason being was that his belief was that all these other little infections will basically prevent your immune system from taking charge and helping you beat Lyme disease. And I don't really think there's a whole lot of evidence out there to back that up. It's probably based on his experience, which I can't argue that. I'm not a doctor and I'm not treating people. But in my mind, saying that all those other infections are menial in comparison to Lyme disease, and I'm not really sure that that's true. And I think one could make just as good of argument saying that, oh well, who's to say that you can't beat those other infections can't be beat until Lyme disease is treated, or that all those things are treated at the same time. But all that to say that I had to follow that approach where we were treating the co-infections first. And the first co-infection that we started to treat was Bartonella. And I went on 2 oral antibiotics, I believe. I went on ciprofloxacin, I believe it's called. I might be mispronouncing that. And clarithromycin. And I actually was very skeptical of all the stuff that he was telling me. I'm like, man, what are the chances that I became sick at a different point in time? Instead of having to treat, one thing, I now have to treat like all these different co-infections plus Lyme. It just didn't sit well with me. And then I went on the orals, and I honestly didn't feel any better. There was no change in my symptoms once I went on that combination. But after 3 months, I got retested for Bartonella through IGeneX, and my titers went down significantly. So I guess you could say I was kind of a believer at that point, even though I wasn't feeling better. We had lab proof that, okay, well, my body was obviously trying to to fight something, and the antibiotics had some kind of effect on that. My concern after that point, though, was, okay, well, we've treated that co-infection. The co-infection went away. It eventually became negative, but I wasn't feeling any better. And I'm like, who's to say that, I wasn't carrying this around, and maybe a bunch of other bacterial infections that are not part of my microbiome. And my body's just dealing with it. It's fine. It's actually not a problem. It's just in other words, I'm asymptomatic. That is not the problem. And he made an analogy that I've heard other Lyme doctors refer to. I think Boris Gano was probably the first person to say this, but his analogy is, well, you're dealing with somebody that has a ton of nails in their foot, and just because you remove one nail doesn't mean that you're not still going to have pain and feel like crap. And I was like, all right, well, I'll keep following that logic, keep trusting this doctor. And I think the next thing we started targeting was the Ehrlichia strains, and I believe I stayed on clarithromycin, but we dropped the Cipro and picked up rifampin. And I'm not sure if that's the ideal combination to treat Ehrlichia, and I might be speaking out of order. Unfortunately, I lost my notes on all the stuff that I was on. I actually kept like this nice spreadsheet with all the antibiotics I was on, and had like a trend analysis to show what was working and what wasn't working, and I can't find it anywhere anymore, unfortunately. But so I'm trying to just do this all from memory. So if something I say doesn't sound correct to some of you, like, oh, that's actually not the combo that you're supposed to be on for that bacteria, you're probably right. And I'll say there was nothing unique about any of the combination of antibiotics that I was on for any of those infections. I mean, if you go on to the iLab's website, or if you look up Boris Gano's guidelines for treating different co-infections in Lyme, my doctor was pretty much going by the book and following those guidelines. And in terms of eradicating those infections, it worked. After another, I'd say, 2 months of being on the rifampin clarithrol combo, I think one of my Ehrlichia strains completely went away, and one of them, the titers were dramatically reduced. And I think the one that was still left was Ehrlichia anaplasmosis. There's like a granulocytic plasmosis or something like that, and an anaplasmosis. Those are the two different strains. And so I still had the anaplasmosis strain, and to be honest with you, that would probably have been one of the most stubborn co-infections that I would treat. It would constantly kind of show up negative in IgG test, and then months later show up positive. And even though it was a lot of money to keep on getting tested for those things, I personally kept requesting to be tested for those things because I wanted some kind of empirical evidence that what we were doing was actually accomplishing something. And a lot of people will say, it's pointless to keep on getting retested. You just follow the antibiotic protocol, and and I understand that. I can understand that logic, but and this is a much bigger topic, and maybe I'll talk about this another time. No one's figured out the equation to this. No one has the cure to this. There's a lot of people that are still really sick, and different things work for everybody. And I've just had to learn, and what everybody's probably going to have to learn is you just have to be your own advocate, and you have to keep on figuring out ways to keep track of what you're doing. And I don't want to get too far off the topic. So all that to say, that was just something that made sense to me, and it was helping to convince me that what I was doing was somewhat beneficial. But still, after treating those Ehrlichia strains and the Bartonella, I still was feeling like crap. And so again, I figured out that I got sick December 2013. Figured out that I was dealing with Lyme around the middle of 2014. Didn't start my first oral antibiotic combination until the fall of 2014. I think after 3 months, I had eradicated Bartonella. I think that got me till around the November December 2014 time frame, we started treatment for Ehrlichia. It only took about 1 to 2 months to eradicate that. So now it's like January, February time frame of 2015. And in that, and during that November time frame, I was growing impatient and a little bit upset because it still wasn't feeling good. I kept pressuring my doctor into trying to treat Lyme disease at the same time, and he wasn't having it. He didn't want to do it. So I took it upon myself to do some research and figure out some things that I could be doing to fight Lyme disease at that point in time. And I tried a couple of different herbal protocols. I think one of them was like the Marshall protocol, and the other one was the Cowden protocol. And I'll be honest, I didn't stick with any one of those protocols for more than a month. I did them for like a month, I saw absolutely no change, had no Herx reactions or anything. I was taking the biggest doses you could take, and nothing was changing, and I just kind of was like, whatever, I'm over this. I'm personally, I will say that I'm biased against that kind of stuff, more holistic herbal approaches. I've definitely changed my mind on that stuff, and I'm more open to it now. But at that point in time, mentally, I just couldn't convince myself that it was going to do anything for me. So I stopped those, and I was doing more research on hyperbaric treatment. And I found a lot of success stories with people that use that. So I got my doctor to write a script for me to go to a facility that did hyperbaric oxygen treatment. And I did that from November into, I think, January of 2015. And altogether, I think I did 40 dives. All of them were, I think, like 2.3 atmospheres. So that's like 2.3 times above atmospheric pressure. And I was breathing pure oxygen while I was in the chamber. And of all the things that I did to that point in time, that actually had an effect on how I felt. And I'd say it got me about 10 to 15% better. I was sleeping a little bit better. I had a little less anxiety, felt a little bit more relaxed. My fatigue got a little bit better, and my mental clarity got a little bit better. But interestingly, something that improved big time during that course of time that I was doing that, my C4A levels went from around like, I think 14,000 down to 600, and that was within a normal range actually. And my CD57 went from a 7 to 50, which was kind of just below the lower level range for that particular biomarker. So, I tried to make a case to my Lyme literate doctor at that time. I'm like, look, this is probably the first Lyme-specific treatment alcohol that I did. It made me feel better, and on paper, those other labs got better. And on the other antibiotics that I was on for the co-infections, those labs actually got worse. So I felt like I had a pretty good argument put together why we should be focusing on Lyme and not the co-infections. But he basically told me I was wrong, and that was not the treatment approach. But I had a hard time wrapping my head around it, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm not a doctor, but I have to go with my gut instincts on this. And if something is making me feel better, and something is not making me feel better, I need to pay attention to that. So around like the February, March time frame of 2015, I decided to part ways with that doctor and find another Lyme literate doctor in the area that would have a little bit more of an aggressive treatment approach and be on the same page with me in terms of, look, this is working, this isn't working, maybe we're doing something wrong, maybe this is the right way to go. And so, fortunately, there's another good group of Lyme literate physicians or doctors in the Bay Area that I started seeing. And my doctor that I've been working with is great. She's incredible, a lot more open, and kind of let me drive the treatment approach, so to speak. And she started me actually right off the bat with intramuscular Rocephin shots, as well as a combination of 2 other orals to treat the rickettsia, because at this point in time I hadn't done anything to specifically target the rickettsia infections that I had. And this was the first time that I felt like a wall had been broken. Within the first 2 weeks of me doing the intramuscular Rocephin shots, I definitely broke through a wall. And I want to say within those couple of weeks, I got about, I'd say, another 20% better. So my fatigue had been brought down modestly. My mental clarity was getting better. I was having speech problems up to that point. That cleared up almost completely. Joint pain was reduced significantly. Muscle pain was reduced significantly. And I was starting to have some kind of capacity to do some exercise. So I was able to ride a bike a little bit. I was still getting like the post-exertional malaise, and it was still setting me back, but not as bad as it was before. So I kept pursuing that treatment approach, as well as the other oral combination for the rickettsia. I can't remember what that oral combo was, but it did work. All my titers came down for rickettsia, and they eventually went negative. But again, even though those results became negative, I strongly feel like that had nothing to do with my symptom improvement. It was more of using the Rocephin. And I do believe that was more of a Lyme-specific treatment approach. Eventually what ended up happening though, and for any of you that have ever done any kind of like intermuscular injections or shots, you run out of spaces to inject yourself. You start developing like these lumps that kind of callus over a little bit. So I just had no surface area left on me anymore to do that. And what we ended up doing is we switched to the IVs. And the interesting thing is like once I gained like that initial 15 to 20% within the first couple weeks of being on the intramuscular Rocephin, I gained a lot really quick, and then it kind of slowed down. I was still getting better, but it was very slow. So I went from more of like an exponential increase in health to more of like a slow linear increase. And so I kept on doing the IV Rocephin. I was still on an oral combo for gosh, I can't remember what it was. I think we were doing some like cyst and biofilm busters during that period of time, and I kept on like gradually getting better, but I eventually hit a wall. So to put a timeline on that, it was around March of 2015 when I started that, and I kind of hit a wall around early May of 2015 with the Rocephin, the IV Rocephin. And my doctor decided that it was time to try some different or more aggressive approaches, I guess I'll say. And what I ended up doing is getting a PICC line installed, and that was so I could do IV doxycycline. And the reason for having to get a PICC line is that your veins can actually not handle IV doxycycline through an IV. It would explode your veins. So in order to follow that treatment approach, I had to get on the IV doxycycline. When I got on the IV doxycycline, I was still doing some other orals. I think it was like cyst buster stuff, biofilm stuff still. I actually had my first panic attack ever. And there was some really weird emotional stuff that was going on with me. And I knew that it wasn't normal. I was like, this has to be a side effect of the doxycycline. And in general, I feel like I backslid a little bit when I was on the IV doxy. So I called up my doctor, let her know what was going on. I'm like, look, I just had this panic attack. I'm pretty sure it's a panic attack. For any of you that have had it, you know how bad it is. For those of you that have never had a panic attack before, it is a horrific feeling. I mean, you have like this crawling out of your skin, almost out of body sensation, feeling like you're gonna die. It's just horrible. And when I was explaining this to her, the first thing that she said was, that sounds like a babesia symptom. And I'm like, well, I've never shown up positive on babesia. I'm like, you guys have, I had literally been tested for babesia every single time I had a genetics test done. And from the fall of 2014 till around the May time frame of 2015, I probably had about 6 hygienic tests done, and every single time it came out negative for Babesia. She's like, well, I think it's worth being tested for that again. She's like, I'm going to start you on Babesia treatment. So I went on like the Malarone, I believe it is, and Alinea. I went on that combo for it, and I think it did help calm down my panic attacks. But I also got tested for it again before I started that combo, and lo and behold, I was a high positive for Babesia microti. Like, I believe my titer levels were around 640. And I'm like, that's unbelievable. It's hard to believe that. Like, how did I go from being completely negative to that to having a high positive? And, you know, the thought was, for me, I was still a little bit skeptical. I'm like, maybe it's a lab error. I'm like, it's a little hard to believe that it's lab error because I'm showing up positive for these symptoms and I'm so high on the lab test. But 3 months later, I got tested for it again, and I was still positive for it. And the titers did come down a little bit, probably because of the combo that I was on to treat that. But what it showed was that more than likely what was happening was all that antibiotic treatment that I was on was eradicating or suppressing those other infections, was probably starting to get a foothold on the Lyme, so my immune system was actually gaining strength and gaining some momentum, so it was recognizing these other infections that were in my body. I mean, interestingly, I was still showing up negative on hygienics tests for Lyme disease up to that point. But I've heard of other people who have treated for Lyme disease who were at first seronegative that actually ended up seroconverting. In other words, their blood tests ended up becoming positive for Lyme disease after they were on treatment for about a year. And the reason for that, or at least the theory is that people who have Lyme disease for such a long period of time, they stop producing antibodies to that infection. And their immune systems are so run down that it can't even recognize the infection anymore. And what happens is once you start treating it and you start suppressing the infection enough, your immune system finally gets some relief and will start kicking in, and it'll start recognizing these infections and can build antibodies to them again. And in my case, that's what happened with the Babesia. Interestingly though, I think I had kept treating the Babesia for about, probably about 6 months, and it never went negative. It never went completely negative, and the titers never reduced that much. And what ended up happening was I stayed on the IV doxycycline and then went on an IV doxy and IV Rocephin combo for a couple months. And what ended up happening is my health ended up getting from about, I'll say, May time frame, I was probably around 50% to around 60% in the June-July time frame. And I ended up hitting a wall and just was going nowhere at that point. So I was taking all this crap. It was a huge financial cost. There were side effects with those medications. You know, I had the PICC line in my arm, and that was irritating in and of itself because, you know, it kept kind of getting inflamed anytime I would do exercise, and it was hard to keep it clean. And you have to get the dressing changed every single week. So, and that was costing me a lot of money plus time. So I was kind of getting frustrated and was looking for answers elsewhere. So that's probably a good stopping point for now. I think in the next part I'll kind of tell you how I went from that 60% getting myself up to about 75%, and kind of just tell you all the things that I was able to do again, and some of the things that I was still struggling with. So until then, I hope you guys rest up and are having a good day.